Welcome to the listening practice. I'll be your host, Koflo. Thank you so much for joining me on this audio expedition where we dive into the world of music that I'm fascinated with, whether it's talking people, talking shop, talking stories, talking systems, talking about venues, behind the scenes, audio engineering, production, you name it, good conversations, whatever the case may be. It's the stuff that I vibe with, and I know there's at least a few of you out there that are just like me that want to take in these different practices of how we can listen to this music, all with a bit of a focus on that dance floor frequency. Hell yeah. Big love to the folks holding it down to help produce this show, the Patreon family. Thank you so much. If you too want to become a producer and get exclusive early access to this show, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Koflo. Show love and support. There's a lot of other goodies that you get alongside of this show, like VIP promos to music and other cool behind the scenes goodness. So thank you to the Patreon fam for holding it down. And I hope to see you in there being a part of this journey with us. On today's episode, we're going to look behind the scenes on a new project of mine and a collaborator, co-collaborator, Mr. Immaculate. Immaculate, the one and only Grammy-nominated super producer, engineer, songwriter extraordinaire out of Chicago. The guy is a beast. He's an absolute multi-talented musical gangster, if you will. And he's also a pretty cool dude. So, we put together an EP coming out on Cataleya Music called Infinite Salutations. It's a two-sider with Salutations being the lead off and Infinite being the B-side. We're going to dive into Salutations, the actual project, the breakdown. We're going to we'll do some nerdy stuff, but we'll kind of look at things, I think, chronologically and just look at how the song came to be in terms of its parts. I think it'll be a pretty cool breakdown for those who like to dig in and know a little bit behind the scenes of the stories of what goes on with the music. This song was actually has a feature and a writing feature by my brother Violin, QVLN, Mr. Quetzal Guerrero. Lyrics and strings performed and written by Q Violin. We also had additional horns that were performed by Ryan Wayne Tedder, and bass by Benny BJ Edwards as electronic bass. Shout out to the executive producer of the record, Jonathan from Cataleya, holding it down, the label boss himself. We appreciate the love and for putting this project together. Okay, let's dive in. What do we got here? I thought it would be cool, rather than completely nerding out on every little detail of things. And I'm sure we'll digress a bit in some cases. I'm going through this because I'll remember things or feel passionate about, maybe wanting to point something out. But I think it would be cool just to talk chronological shop as to how the song writing came to be, like the process of where things go and how it got to where it's at. So I thought, rather than just do a breakdown part by part, we try to focus on maybe chronologically and how I can recall some of the events to the music taking shape. Let's start out by just giving you a preview of what the song is about. We'll go ahead and, let's jump into this first section here, and we'll just rock out from this first part where things kind of get introduced as the first motif into the verse, and then out from the hook from there. Let's check it out. Every flow into this night we sing. Move every choice with what this life will bring. Together with this moment we all share. When the spirit catches all can see, joy this ignites as the lightning beams, and witness to the love that's everywhere. there's a little taste. We'll get more into it. We'll hear some more sections. So, so as you can hear, a few different motifs, a few different elements and ideas of call and response and vocals. There's some lyrics. There's some supporting harmony. There's extension. I mean, it's quite a bit going on musically, but at the same time, like I think lockstep, it sits in a groove. It sits in a groove, and it sits in a groove in a way that I think really started, in my opinion, with the DNA of the song. So the DNA goes back to essentially me sitting on like a Wurlitzer or a Rhodes patch, sitting in the studio with Q and him on my fake Les Paul, and us kind of coming up with something, a bit of fill in the blank, or a bit of what do you think could go on top of here, or how could we extend this idea into something. And I had started playing some changes on the Wurlitzer, and they sounded Wurlitzer or Rhodes, and they sounded something like this. Rhythmically, I remember it being like kind of a syncopated vibe. And I don't remember exactly what was being played in the moment because we weren't recording, but I do remember it being like a Rhodes or a Wurlitzer patch, because I remember thinking like the bite of the thing made me want to play that rhythm as I was, coming up with those chords. And Q was kind of like riffing, kind of like creating a rhythm, like a back rhythm with the guitar. And I remember as he was doing it, he was finding little like breakouts, like little leads to a melody. And I remember hearing stuff and being like, ooh, yeah, da 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 da, like kind of like scatting back or maybe finding the notes with the keys. And we ended up with a guitar part that became essentially the original motif. It became the full extension of where the writing went to how the rest of the song took shape. And that was this part. And I think this is like just hearing those two parts together. And I do remember the feeling of like, oh, this could be something. There's a lot of work ahead, but this could be something. And I remember thinking that because I already could feel dance. Like I could already feel creating something to that, like in that vibe. Like it was like there was enough rhythm already without any drums or any bass. There was already enough rhythm and already enough like sing along, if that makes sense, to where I felt like movement could paint the picture. So I thought this could be a really good tune. Needless to say, the next steps were trying to find some kind of like rhythm section. And so I put together some drums. I don't remember exactly what I did on the demo drums, but they probably were pretty close to this, if not this. And then we just removed some stuff or massaged stuff as things went back and forth between me and Emac. But I remember building a drum section. Then I remember also doing a bass. So here's the original bass, which is not in the tune anymore because we recorded live bass. But here is the drums and the bass with the changes in the melody to kind of like shape up what was to be the songwriting. So check out just the bass. Fake ass sounding is a Patchen's analogy. The finger E bass, finger E BS1. Yeah, it is some bullshit. It's definitely a fake sounding bass, but like, in the presence of the demo, shit, even in like a recording, like it feels like a bass, right? And you know, it's played. I played it on the keys, of course, but we ended up replacing that bass with a live bass from BJ, which sounds like this. So not only a great fill that doesn't feel a bit stiff, because sometimes the expression of an electric bass versus the expression on a keyboard, things can feel a bit stiff on the keyboard. The expression feels good. I know it sounds a bit distorted and wonky, but that's because of how the mix is to get things to cut and to sit in the mix. Sometimes when you hear things on their own, the tonality is a little bit different. And speaking of which, check out the guitar without the amp and the amp model and effects. It's quite uninviting comparatively. Like, check this out. I'm gonna turn on the model. Jazz, baby. Yeah. No jazz. Where's the jazz? There it is. You know, I really fucks with guitar people, because there's like this thing, and I'm not a guitarist, but there's this thing about chasing tone and about having like an identity in tone. And I really fucks with that, because in dance music, I think it's a lot of the same thing, but like from a production perspective, where you're chasing tonality, or you're chasing like a sonic landscape, in some cases more so than the effort of like good songwriting, meaning like good melody or proper hooks or whatever. Like you're chasing like a sonic idea that can be really, really like the basis of like, oh yeah, the vibe on the way these drums sound, or the vibe on the way this bass sounds, versus these notes are incredible, or this is the most beautiful melody I've ever heard. Anyways, taking a bunch of guitar recording, we ended up recording like what was essentially like leads and comping together stuff to try and create like a verse versus a chorus or a motif. And then took some like rhythm guitar parts and just comped together something simple, added some additional tracking for like, you know, essentially extended harmony. Like I ended up really lucking out and placing, here's some additional chords against the original chords. So I say I looked out with this particular, not because of the chords, but basically the particular patch is this Psycho EP Roland patch, which is like this nostalgic Rhodes, warbly Rhodes. And I've always wanted to put that on something, because it's quite like a famous sound. And I know like the JD800s, Crystal Rhodes, and I think it was like the Roland MC307, if I'm not mistaken, the Groove Station, this guy here. I believe this had that patch on it, if I remember reading about it correctly. But anyways, like I think back in high school we used to mess around with the MC303, or maybe it was a 305, I can't remember. But anyways, this patch is like this, you know, this is this classic Roland sound that I always want to like try to fit on something, but it never fits on anything that I'm making, but I'll try it anyways. So I lucked out, being that I like reached for it and I thought it really fit, like at least from a demo perspective, it really fit the vibe. So yeah, so we ended up, I ended up arranging out kind of this A and B part with the drums, the guitar, the accompanied guitar, the accompanied harmony, and then these leads. And I ended up with these sections that kind of mirrored like what we heard at the beginning, but it was just drums, bass, guitar rhythm, the additional Rhodes, and of course like the main pieces. So we ended up with a section which I arranged out like verse, chorus, maybe a breakdown, whatever. And it kind of like was something like this. Right. So, I mean, it sounds like the song, right? Like all the meat and potatoes are there for like the theme of the song, right? So that got shot over to Emac. And I remember the first call I got from him was like, hey, bro, this is really dope. I'm digging this. I kind of have an idea. Would you be into us recording some horns? And I don't do a lot of stuff with horns. I mean, to actually work with like real horns and try to get like a horn section, I have very few projects under my belt, and even less projects under my belt actually writing for horns. So Emac, who's, you know, done a bunch of cool stuff from disco to his own productions and kind of his own horn writing, he decided to get this horn part together. And I remember him on the phone being like, yeah, I got this idea, da, 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 like kind of singing it to me. And I thought, you know, it sounds like Immaculate just giving me a diddly, and the diddly sound like it could fit, but in my head, did I really hear the way the horns are going to be put together? Probably not. So he goes and does his stuff to get his horns together. He starts comping his horn parts together, arranging his horn parts. As he's doing that, he also hits me up about getting my bass writing, getting re-recorded, and getting, you know, just getting things more lively, getting the real bass in there. And he hit me back with some really cool stuff. Essentially had the horn parts kind of put together. He had some like Solina style strings. In other words, like a string instrument, like doing orchestral strings, but they weren't real strings. They're like, you know, string synthesized strings. He had some additional kind of accent ideas put into place with some other instruments. And he also did yet another kind of supplemental lead or hook idea, another hook, you know, think like, you know, a good Michael Jackson song has like 20,000 hooks in it between the vocal, the scatting, the actual chorus, the guitar riffs. Like, you know, a good like musical idea sometimes will have 5-6 different like hooks to like grab your attention. So you always have something to sing along, or in the dance world to create like a new section of what you're doing with your dance. So he had like this Moog lead that he had put in there. And and we ended up with like this really cool idea, which it was arranged differently. But I took it, started arranging it in a way that I felt like, okay, this is going to give us complete sections A and B. But we essentially had these horns added in. They were giving way to different sections. We had the leads, these string ideas, which we ended up recording real strings with Q. And we ended up with something that felt more like this. If we were just kind of like listen to those pieces. And it was like in a section that kind of went like this. Right. So we had multiple sections. We kind of had like that riff section of the call and response between like the stabs and the brass. And then we had, you know, his take on the Moog, the Moog lead to kind of reference the motif of the song. We also had like these more pieced together sections that were a little bit less about the syncopation and more about like I don't know, creating a sense of like tension, like contrast, like tension and release. Right, so it's like the hook, the nod again to the hook, but like the change in the way the brass is going from like this like rhythmic element to like all encompassing and supporting. And by itself, it's like we had these parts that really, we had enough parts and we had enough like supporting idea from all this instrumentation between what we had already done to where as I'm arranging and trying to fit all the compositional pieces in place where I felt like they had enough tension release, they had enough space where right parts would fit and whatever. I was getting like good linear arrangement, right? Like I was getting like things to like fit well on a timeline, but it just felt like there was still like empty stuff taking place. And I realized, because I'm a damn fool, and when it comes to percussion, it's like I always want to overdo it, that I felt like there just wasn't enough movement. I had put in some crashes, or maybe Emac had put in some crashes or whatever to signify changes in sections. But I was like, we need something like live that feels as live as the bass, as live as the horns, as live as the guitar, like something that feels like it moves with the song. So I ended up loading up some Latin percussion, timbales and bells and different things like that, some ride cymbals. I ended up just doing a couple of passes where I just, in my current arrangement, I'd start the track head, hit record, and then with MIDI, just go through and play parts. Now, without any context, it sounds a little crazy, but right? So it's like I was doing fills, accents, a little bit of supplemental rhythm, because, you know, our percussion and stuff, be it live in terms of what it is and how it was programmed and put together, like it has an organic sound, but like it's not being played live. So as much groove as there is, it is looping essentially. So being able to put in like these live elements, which is that whole top section up here, to be able to have those live elements in there, I think like really moves along the percussion to make it feel more live than it is. And obviously, you know, someone like me who really loves organic percussion, the whole track doesn't feel live in that way. It is missing that. And, you know, if maybe we were to do like a studio version, I could really see having a few percussionists and a drummer to like really fill out all of how I would envision this to be done. But that's to say, like, once I had added in that percussion against everything else we had put together, I realized I still feel like there's a sonic bed that maybe was missing, if that makes any sense. So the sonic bed ended up being, for me, the organ. Again, playing a really small role in terms of like, just like the timbales and the Latin percussion, it's a small role in the landscape of things versus like the horns or what ended up being like the violin or the vocals. But it's like the supporting role of it and trying to play it as live as possible. Meaning, I ended up doing a lot of volume automation, which I was doing by hand, either while playing or trying to overdub after the fact, where I'm, you know, MIDI mapping on the keyboard and kind of like, I mean, look at the automation here. It's kind of crazy, but it's the idea of like how me faking the funk, not being an organist, how an organist may swell parts and pad parts and kind of like lift things. And there's a whole bunch of other automation, like changing some of the drawbar parts. And of course, turning up the Leslie speed to give like more of like a chorusing effect. So all those kind of like, again, live elements going through. And how did I do it? The same way I did Latin percussion. I went to the beginning, I hit record, I would play a pass. Then I'd come back, maybe comp together what I liked, didn't like, then maybe do another pass in a section. So you end up with different sections of different passes to try and like fulfill the role. And I think the organ added quite a bit. Like if, for example, if I go to this section, after here, where we go to the last guitar verse, we can hear how the organ becomes like a nice supportive role. Right. So, I mean, depending on where you're at and what else is going on, and we still don't have all the parts in, there's 118 tracks and not all the parts are playing right now. Like we're still missing, I didn't have the horn lines on here. Didn't have the strings, the vocals, but like, depending on where it sits in the song, it's kind of like a general sense of support. And I think the smart thing about trying to encapsulate this style of song is that you keep a good groove that's predictable. You rely on the songwriting to create like a sense of where the dance wonderment is and how the dance art can kind of be expressed in different ways. But then instrumentation wise, not everybody's always getting a chance to play. Like, just like, a real band, if you're trying to put something together, a good musician is going to learn how to shut the fuck up when they need to like chill and sit back to let something else take place. So, trying my best to kind of like at this second to last bit of arrangement and composition after getting the track back from Immaculate, like find the space for all that. Once I had gotten through the last bit was essentially the last kind of solo, which I played on the synth, which is here. That's this guy. All right, so that premise of that solo is similar to like the guitar solos, which are like essentially the main verses, trying to keep with the changes, but give a nod to the melody, right? Give a nod to the actual main melody of the song, the main hook, the motif of the song, just like the horns did in certain sections, just like the Moog does in certain sections, keeping with that theme so we have that earworm. And then, from a dance expressionist perspective, if you can latch on to a new timbre delivering the same motif, you can choose different dance movement. Like you can express it differently. It could be heavier, it could be lighter. Like the brass accompaniment with all parts is going to feel big and large. So, the movement can match that or reflect that, versus like this synth lead is a bit wobbly. It's a bit uncharacteristic. So maybe that's a bit off kilter, maybe a bit wobbly or, drunken in terms of the movement, So after we had all these parts, there was a last little bit that I was thinking about, which was I kept hearing this Josh Milan type of like vocal elements of life, kind of like uplifting choir type of, I don't know. I just kept hearing something. I didn't necessarily have like a lyric for it. I wanted it maybe positive and together. But I kind of heard like these lifts, and I also heard like some additional vocal padding, some oohs and ahs and that type of thing. But you think like like Josh Milan or George Duke, like Brazil, or something that just feels like a remnants of like gospel or classic disco vocal like groups. And I didn't want it to like overshadow what the song was. Like, I didn't want that to be the motif, but I wanted it like supporting, again, another hook. And maybe it's a bit listening ADD, but it was like I could feel something. So I recorded a message for Q, and I sent it to him, and I said, hey man, you remember that song that you did the guitar on? Like, check this out. Look what we got going on. If you're into this, I'd love to have you do a vocal part, thinking like I probably would get either supporting vocal accompaniment or whatever. And, I said I didn't have any lyrics, but I'm thinking in this spirit, like lyrically. And Q's really good at lyrics. He's really good at, doing his vocal parts and kind of arranging vocal parts even for himself. So he was like, yeah, I can definitely do something. This is really cool. And you guys got fake strings in there. Can I re-record your strings? And I'm like, yeah, of course. If he's, I thought the strings were working, but of course I'll take real strings over the fake strings. Why not? Especially if they're meant to sound like real strings, right? So I get the parts back from him, and I get back essentially this vocal, which sounds like this.
As we flow into this night, we sing, move and rejoice with what this life will bring. Together with this moment we all share. When the spirit catches all can see, join us ignites as the lightning beams. Bear witness to the love that's everywhere.
And there's actually, I think he may have gave me one or two more tracks with like a lower register, but it like harmonically, like the cut through and where things were going to sit in the mix. This is what I ended up with after, mixing and kind of producing the vocal ambiance. And I ended up actually doing it a bit. I overdid it a bit. And I remember that was one of the final passes of engineering. Emac gave me notes back and was like, hey, let's dry out the vocal a bit. So what you're hearing is the final result of Q. But we got that, and then I got my oohs and ahs that I was asking for. And again, that's all just Q being multi-tracked. It's all him singing himself. And then once I had got it in the mix, I'd kind of planned on doing maybe one or two additional parts, accompaniment. So I started tracking an accompaniment voice myself, and I thought, okay, maybe I'll get a female vocal or whatever. And as I was going through it, I was realizing that as much as it was cool, I was really quickly realizing it was going to go quite a bit bigger, like meaning like you start to add that many more nuances and voices, and you end up with like a really big sound. And because this was like almost like a verse call, like it's like a call to action. It's not like your traditional verse, because I'm treating the solos and the guitars and stuff as verses. It could quite easily be too dramatic too quickly. And again, maybe if we were doing like a live version of this and we arranged it differently for like stage, we could approach the vocal largeness different. So I just wanted more character as I started to develop it. And one of the tricks to do that is to use modern technology. So I ran Q's voice through a series of vocal formant changing AI. So when I say vocal formant changing, I mean like taking his voice exactly how he performs it, exactly in his key, but then changing the voice box, like turning it into something else. So if you're not familiar when someone mentions vocal formant, here's a plugin that I can kind of show you what I mean. And like in a nutshell, the most basic principle of like vocal formant manipulation is about taking a voice box and the vocal diaphragm in general and either shrinking it or enlarging it. And when you shrink it, it starts to feel younger and in some cases more feminine. And if you start to enlarge it, it starts to feel older and in some cases more masculine. So like, for example, if I take his voice and I just start to shrink it by pushing the formant up, you'll hear what it does to his voice.
As we flow into this night, we sing, move and rejoice with what this life will bring. Together with this moment, we are standing.
Versus if I stretch it the other direction.
When the spirit catches all can see, join us ignites as the lightning beams. Bear witness to the love that's everywhere.
Right? So it's pretty cool because you get to manipulate the way things sound in terms of the human character, but what you miss versus what you're gonna get and end up with this really big result is that when the performances are lockstep, like they're like timing wise, rhythmic wise, syllabaically, intelligibility, when everything's together, it feels a bit digital. It feels a bit like too perfect. And that ends up giving, from like an engineering perspective, that ends up giving me like a different series of like paint colors to use to get the vocal to sit in the mix. So my intention isn't to take Q out of the mix. My intention is to give enough kind of like harmonic color that all of a sudden he feels a bit bigger and a bit more polished, but we're not like chorusing him like he's a part of like this giant choir of people. And again, that was like a decision where as soon as I started like tracking, and I ended up doing like some additional other vocal tracking to as I was like kind of figuring my way through this, and I just started realizing really quickly like how big it was sounding, and it was like inspiring a different direction for the song. So I ended up passing his vocal through a male voice and two other like two other voices to try and like change the timbre up. So like here we have like this other guy's voice, which is essentially Q. We're just a different vocal format or vocal diaphragm, right? And then artificially pitching that up an octave and then also up a fifth from that placement. There's the octave, here's the fifth. Right, so it sounds incredibly fake. So it's like, well, why would you do that if his voice and his harmonies sound so good? Well, these are all real vocal passes and harmonies. All this stuff is him singing. It's imperfect because it's him singing on himself, right? It's not aligned correctly. This is just literally aligned to his main line of lyrics, right? And I did the same thing essentially with two other female voices. So here's one of them.
And we flow into this night, we sing, move and rejoice with what this life will bring.
Sounds like she smokes too many cigarettes.
And we flow into this night, we sing.
Sounds a little more real.
Move and rejoice with what this life will bring.
The octave up sounds more female real, but still sounds crazy as shit though. But anyways, all together, we end up with something like this.
As we flow into this night, we sing, move and rejoice with what this life will bring.
Right? So it sounds like Q. It sounds like him. It doesn't sound like it's a whole bunch of other people, but like the supportive ear candy in the harmonic color, like the undertone, it's like underpainting. Like there's some transparency there between his vocal chorus and what gets painted underneath. So I know that's a bit in the trenches with the vocal part, but I mean, we skipped over so many production engineering things. So rather than nerd out on every little thing, I thought that'd be cool to kind of show you where like technology used creatively can really deliver something really cool with the ingenuity of the human spirit kind of guiding the ship, you know, with what Q did with the vocal. And of course, he gave me some strings, and I want to call out something with the strings because he doubled the strings that we already had put in place, which is like this section, Immaculate had written some strings, and it sounded like this. All right. So this is literally the original strings right here. So those were the recorded strings. Here's the original strings. Right? It's like that's Stranger Things strings, and then this is like the real strings. So it's like all the expression, all the bowing, like so beautiful, right? But then he ended up giving us this like outro section, which I ended up using part of it as the intro, and I ended up using part of it as the outro. But he gave us this other section that he just, was kind of just like playing, and trying to create like a sense of vibe, like kind of just what he heard, and he's a brilliant musician. And then he also gave us like these parts that like, I'm starting to learn a little bit more about how maybe I could write for strings. And it's just a matter of like knowing the instrument. He ended up giving us these like classic disco like pieces that normally this is the kind of shit that Immaculate would write. And Q kind of came up with this, and I ended up arranging it in a place that felt like it was best served. But he kind of had done it just as like a segment change. And this is what I'm talking about, like this. Right? Two small parts that were just kind of like left in there. And he put, mind you, he put all this stuff kind of at the front of the track. So it was like, he wasn't arranging this. He's just like, you asked me for this stuff, I'm going to go do it. Boom, 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 boom. And then it's kind of up to us to, arrange and compose like how all these parts are supposed to fit together. So he gave me that, and I was like, I need to put that in where it makes sense. So of course I ended up putting it kind of at like, all right, this is the end of the tune. Because to me, it kind of sounded like, it's Jurassic Park, like, hey, we made it off the island type of shit, So I put it at the end. So now it's like we have vocals, strings, ranging, all that stuff. And it was about like, just sprinkling the last bit of goodness on it and getting the engineering parts in. And we ended up with something really, really, really cool, I think. So what I'd like to do for you now to just kind of round it out is like play a few sections. I could talk about the sections a little bit more, but just play a few sections so you get a sense of the song. And then if you want to hear the whole song in its entirety, I don't need to play the whole thing for you here. This song will be available for you to check out. And I hope that if it's something that you really like, you'd support it by either picking up the record or paying for the digital, or if it's available on streaming, if Cataleya is making it available on streaming, stream it and check it out. So I'm going to give you all the intro. Check out how this intro came together with all these strings and everything as it goes into the vocal. Check this out. Right, and then we go into like the first verse. I think it was like, it's not common to me to put that much up at the front of a song, especially coming off of such a bare bones, like mellow kind of intro. But I think like, my idea is like, get to something that feels good, and then the rest of it has so much groove and so much opportunity for other things. Like, I don't know, something to grab your attention, and the vocal only gets used 3 times. And it's brought on with a different sense of contrast each time. So, rather than just rinse and repeat the format, like trying to find an interesting way that feels unique to where it's listenable. It's not predictable, but it's listenable. Because sometimes predictable stuff is obviously listenable because you know it's going to come. But then when it's unpredictable, sometimes it's unsettling. It's kind of like, ugh. But, there's the payoff isn't right. So that was an interesting thing to try to find, right? Here's another section that I'd love to share that has an interesting, my second favorite part of the entire arrangement, which is this like little alternative section where we go from like a verse on the guitar into like a vocal give out into the bigger section of the horns, right? So it kind of goes from like this section here into this big horn section. And we have like a change up in the vibe. So I'll put you back a few bars and listen to this change up. So if I could just talk really quickly, again, my second favorite part, my favorite part is the very end. But if I could just talk about when it comes to like arranging dance music, one of the things when you look at alternate styles of arranging more on a grid, one of the things that tends to suffer is just losing a sense of like the feeling of something important, and how getting a little bit of that thing lingering is a level of detail that like I think connects a little bit more on a human level. I know that sounds so ambiguous. What the fuck am I talking about? So if I was to just like look at what's going on with the keys here, right, from section to section, we have like these changes that end up changing back to what we're used to. Right, so that's the alternate change. Right, and then it goes into the normal changes, right? It's like it's very rigid. And like with electronic music, a lot of the format of arranging stuff is rigid from section to section. And you know, I know some people are like, well, that's how you get changes in the arrangement. Like there's rigidity. But for folks that are like playing live music, there's not really that same sense of rigidity. There's always going to be something that is left over or is in passing because you're physically playing it in a linear fashion. Like it's going from one place to another, where and don't get me wrong, like I like vibing in both directions, very rigid as well as like more of a linear, smooth, linear flow. Having the ability to let something continue or pass or leave like a bit of a trail ends up feeling really, really good in a way that you're not necessarily looking for it, but it feels good. And it's one of those like arrangement tricks that even in electronic music where you're not thinking necessarily about that, if you're just making like more machine music, you could still get away with that with other things like making use of delay throws or reverb tails and different stuff that just allows us to change sections but not necessarily get rid of what was good in the section prior. So I'll just call this little detail out. The lead that Emac had going on here originally was sounding like this. And after I placed it in the arrangement, we had something that was like this here. So if we look at this and how it was originally arranged, and I can't necessarily play it back with the kind of original arrangement idea because everything else has been rearranged. So then you end up with like missing pieces. But if this is where our one is here at bar 161, and this was originally going to dump out there, we end up with something that it makes sense, right? Where we have a note that's holding at the end of the phrase and then it drops off. But the difference of like being able to allow that note to kind of just play through the next section as the one starts, I feel like has a more like, this is kind of how a human may end up like playing out the song rather than just dropping everything out. So check this out. Right? It definitely works. I mean, it works, but I think like having that little bit of detail where we just let it fall out quietly is such a vibe. Right? And it's like that note is kind of like we're walking up and boom. And that note's kind of matching where the top of that melody is in the vocal. I don't know. Those little arrangement details. Okay, I'll play one more little section here that is my favorite section. And it comes by way of the last bit of vocal, the last bit of horns, and the ending with the strings to the give out. So I'm going to drop you in here right at the beginning of the last solo. And those strings fading out past the one, like just super super like we just got off the island. Like it's super, it takes you to the top and then it's like, yay, we've escaped. Yeah, so I don't know. Definitely my favorite part of the arrangement is kind of that back piece with the change and the lift and the horns, and it's got such a cool vibe. Super proud of the way that this turned out. So that'll do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed digging into the dig-ins and what we had going on with the song. I'm really proud of the tune. I'm really happy with how it came out. I hope you get a chance to get a copy of the wax or download, or if it's available on streaming, you just get a chance to dance to it. Thank you to the Patreons once again for helping produce these shows. And if you want to join the Patreon family, head over to patreon.com/coflow, and you too can get early access to these episodes and these different things we got going on, as well as VIP music, behind the scenes, and other cool stuff. And we'll see you in the next one. Have a great day. Peace.